Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming to my presentation. So my name is Lauren Grodi, and I'm going to be talking to you all today about my research on the effects of core stability training on athletic performance in NCAA Division III collegiate women athletes. I hope you enjoy. So to begin, we're just going to talk about a little bit of what this presentation is going to hold. So we're going to start off with the introduction, move on to study parameters, go on to methods, results, and then finally discussion and conclusions. So first up is the introduction. So before we get to talking about my research, we're going to go over what the core actually is. So the core is the body's center of gravity and provides stability and balance during athletic or powerful exercises. Some of the main muscles involved for simple to complex movements are the transverse abdominis, internal and external obliques, the rectus abdominis, and the diaphragm as well. Another key concept to understanding this research is the difference between core strength and core stability. So the main difference between core strengthening and core stability is that strengthening focuses on resistance of fatigue, while stability focuses on maintaining balance. Core stability also allows stabilization of the spine and trunk of the body to allow maximum force and translation to the upper and lower extremities. Previous literature on core stability proposes the idea that it can increase athletic performance, especially used in combination with dynamic balance exercises. And this is because having the ability to stabilize the core as well as the spine allows for an individual to distribute compressive, translational, and shear forces to the rest of the body. So there are two specific studies I want to talk about before getting into mine. So the first one is the relationship between core stability and performance in Division I football players, and also the relationship between core stability and athletic performance, which focuses on Division II football players. It's important to note that these studies did not look at if core stability training could enhance sports performance, but simply if core stability and sport performance were related in any sort of way. So the first study is the relationship between core stability and performance in Division I football players, and this study examined the relationship of power and strength to core stability. It used a multivariate correlation design, which is a design that study used to test an association involving more than one measured variable. The purpose is to measure the correlation between the variables value and the best predictions that can be computed linearly from that predictive variables. And so the core stability was tested by the McGill trunk flexion test, a trunk extensor test, and a lateral musculature test. So the McGill trunk flexion test is a static isometric contraction of the interior muscles which stabilize the spine until the individual exhibits fatigue and can no longer hold the assumed position. The trunk extensor test is another muscular endurance test of the torso extensor muscles. This is done by having an individual lay flat on their stomach with their arms by their side, and then the participant is required to lift their chest 12 inches off of the floor until they exhibit fatigue. And then the last one, the lateral musculature test, this is done with the participant in a full side bridge position, and failure of the test occurs when the person loses their straight back posture or their hips return to the ground. And then in this study, strength and power were tested by 1RM bench, 1RM squat, 1RM power clean, 20-yard sprint, 40-yard sprint, a pro agility shuttle run, and a counter movement vertical jump. And for those of you who don't know, a 1RM stands for repetition maximum, and it's the maximum amount of weight that one can lift for any given exercise. Moving on to the second study, so this is the relationship between core stability and athletic performance. So this study examined the relationship of core endurance and core stability. So core endurance was measured through a 60-second and 30-second maximum sit-up test. And so these tests basically just record the amount of sit-ups an individual can do within the stated time limit. And then the core stability was measured through the McGill trunk flexion test, which, as we stated before, is a static isometric contraction of the interior muscles, which stabilize the spine until the individual exhibits fatigue and can no longer hold that assumed position. So overall, both of these studies were able to conclude that core stability tests were reliable and related to sports performance in football players. However, this type of literature is scarce and mainly focuses on Division I or Division II athletes, so these results are not applicable to the gross population due to differences in physiology, specifically between genders, which ultimately led me to wanting to research on how core stability can affect Division III female athletes, as this literature is incredibly scarce. So moving on to study parameters. So my hypothesis was that core stability training will increase passing and setting accuracy for volleyball athletes. Core stability training will increase arm hitting speed in volleyball athletes. Core stability training will increase throwing accuracy in softball athletes. Core stability training will increase arm speed when throwing for softball athletes. And core stability training will decrease speed in softball athletes. And the primary purpose of this research study was to examine the effects of core stability on sports performance. Moving on to methods. So we had a total of 20 participants in this study. So 15 of those were female Division III volleyball intercollegiate athletes, and 5 were female Division III softball intercollegiate athletes, and they were all aged between 18 to 21 years. For independent variables were the core stability exercises, and we'll talk a little bit more about these as the presentation continues. The dependent variables for volleyball was passing accuracy, setting accuracy, and arm hitting speed. And the dependent variables for softball was throwing accuracy, run speed, and arm throwing speed. So for pre and post testing for volleyball, so passing accuracy was tested by asking the participants to pass into a designated 20-inch by 20-inch target 10 times, and the amount of times they hit the target was recorded. So these participants were asked to pass from the middle back position, which is 9 feet off of the volleyball net and about 7 feet inside from the right sideline of the court. The target was located at the net directly in front of the participant. And then for setting accuracy, this was tested by asking the participants to set into the same designated target 10 times, and the amount of times they hit the target was recorded. Participants were asked to set 6 inches off the net and 5 feet in from the right sideline of the court, and the target was 25 feet away and once again directly in front of the participant. Arm hitting speed was then measured using dartfish programming. 3 individual trials measured the velocity of each hitting speed, and then the average arm hitting speed was then calculated and documented. For pre and post testing for softball, so throwing accuracy was tested by asking the participants to throw a tennis ball at a target. Each participant completed 10 throws, and the amount of times they hit within the target was recorded. So the target the athletes threw at was 15 inches long and 10 inches wide, and the participants stood 17 feet away from the target when throwing. Arm throwing speed was tested using dartfish programming. The participants were asked to throw a tennis ball 3 individual times, and the average arm throwing speed was then calculated and documented. It's important to note here that the distance the tennis ball traveled when being thrown does not matter, as the arm throwing speed is what was being measured. And then finally, running speed was measured by a stopwatch as the participants ran the distance from home plate to first base. Each participant ran this distance 3 individual times with 1 minute rest interval between each run, and then the average time was then calculated and documented. And the distance from home plate to first base is 60 feet. So for the core stability training program, the participants were required to meet with me 3 times a week for 6 weeks to complete the set of core stability exercises. And the participants completed 4 exercises each session for 2 sets of 10 repetitions. And so before they underwent their exercises, all the participants did undergo a warm-up, which included head rotations for 8 repetitions, arm swings for 12 repetitions, torso swings for 15 repetitions, and knee rotations for 8 repetitions. And then after they completed their exercises, all participants also engaged in a cool down, which included standing abdominal stretch, cobra pose, standing oblique stretch, and lumbar rotational stretch. And each of these was held for 30 seconds. And so this is a list of all the exercises that the participants completed. So they did their pre-test, underwent 6 weeks of this core stability training program, and then at the end of their 6 weeks, we retested those same sport-specific movements. And so how these exercises were split up, so the first time they met with me, they did the first 4 exercises, and then the second time they met with me, they completed the last 4. Third time they met with me, back to the first 4, and we continued on through that cycle. And so these exercises were as listed, which are the quadruped opposite arm leg, supine single leg marching, bridge ups, physio ball pikes, seated abdominal draw in on a physio ball, a plank, abdominal draw in with feet on a ball, prone bridging on elbows with single leg hip extension as well. And so these are just some diagrams to kind of help you get an understanding of what each exercise was. So the first four, the quadruped opposite arm leg, supine single leg marching are as pictured here. Continuing with the first four exercises were the bridge ups and the physio ball pikes. And then the last four were the seated abdominal draw in on a physio ball and the forearm plank, as well as the abdominal draw in with feet on physio ball and prone bridging on elbows with single leg hip extension as well. And for the data analysis, so a two-tailed t-test in SPSS V21.0 was used, as well as a paired samples t-test, which was used to compare the pre to post-test findings for accuracy for both groups, and arm hitting speed and arm throwing speed were measured using Dartfish programming. Moving on to results. So for results, there was no significant difference for both groups with respect to accuracy. As you can see, the p-values for passing accuracy, setting accuracy, and throwing accuracy are listed below. Continuing with results, there were significant findings for arm hitting speed in volleyball athletes, so the p-value was 0.001. There were also significant findings for arm throwing speed in softball athletes, the p-value was 0.015. And there were significant findings for runtime in softball athletes with a p-value of 0.14. And so this graph shows the pre and post-test results for the volleyball athletes' hitting speed and the softball athletes' throwing speed. It's important to note that this graph is comparing the pre to post-testing results of hitting or throwing speed of each individual, and it is not comparing the two sports. So the light maroon is the pre-test results for arm throwing speed in softball athletes, and the light gray is post-test results. So you'll see these located more to the left of the graph. And then the dark maroon on the right side of the graph is the pre-test arm hitting speed for volleyball athletes, and the dark gray is the post-test results. As you can see, there's a very large increase in arm speed for pre-testing and post-testing in both of the groups. As mentioned before as well, run time for softball athletes was also significant, but it's just not pictured in this graph. Moving on to discussion and conclusions. So, the hypothesis that core stability training will have a positive effect on passing accuracy and setting accuracy in volleyball athletes is rejected. The hypothesis that core stability training will have a positive effect on throwing accuracy in softball athletes is also rejected. However, when core stability is applied to sports performance, this study showed a 50% significant difference when comparing pre-testing to post-testing. So moving on, even though looking at the relationship between core stability and sports performance is a relatively new concept, there is some literature out there that supports my hypothesis that core stability training will increase arm throwing speed for softball athletes and arm hitting speed in volleyball athletes, such as the one on this slide. So this study analyzed the effect of core stability on throwing velocity in female handball players. So the athletes who participated in this study performed regular handball training for 6 weeks, along with a set list of core stability exercises. Their throwing velocity was measured before and after their training. And this study found that the overall maximum throwing velocity increased by 4.9%. So in conclusion, core stability training made a positive impact on sports performance by increasing arm hitting speed for volleyball athletes, arm throwing speed for softball athletes, and decreasing run time from home plate to first base. For future research, there are many possibilities and different ways you could go with this. Some of the ones that I was specifically interested in was examining different sports such as track and field athletes, soccer athletes, or lacrosse athletes, examining different sport-specific variables such as power, reaction time, or endurance, and then also examining the effects that core stability has on injury prevention in athletes. So thank you guys so much for viewing my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, my email is listed there, and you just feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about anything. Thank you guys so much.